I'm Rand Jack. I am a resident of Van Zant, Washington, and the people out there say I live in Van Zant Heights. And I moved to Whatcom County in 1971 when I took a job teaching at Fairhaven College. I'd been working for a big hotshot law firm in Seattle and hated almost every minute of it. After I'd been teaching for a few years, I got a phone call from someone that I knew before who was now the headmaster at Groton School in Massachusetts, and he asked me to if I would come back and teach there for a year just as a visiting teacher. And so my wife Dana and I agreed to do it if we could share the teaching job. So we went back there, and for the first time I started using tools because Groton had this incredible workshop, and that the tradition was that the students would take wood shop and make things, and then at the end of the year there would be this big display of all the things that the students made, and there was a very good shop teacher who actually did most of the work on the things that the students were claiming credit for.
My name is Dana Jack, and the Jack is because I'm married to Rand Jack and lost my maiden name, which was Crowley. That was in 1968. And I met Rand when I was at Mount Holyoke College, and he was at Yale Law School. We got married, obviously, in 1968 in Houston, Texas. And then we decided to move out to Washington State because it had mountains and ocean and lots of wonderful things that we knew we would love. So during that time, we decided that we wanted to live in the county. And as Rand had called it, those were our hippie days, and we wanted to get back to the land. We had our first child, Darby, in 1975 while we were building a little cabin a little farther down, closer to the main road. And we cleared a lot of the land by hand, not a lot of it, maybe almost, not quite an acre, so we could have an orchard, which we also planted. And then Rand built an octagonal, exquisite little cabin that was tiny. So we all lived in that for a while we started building the house up here, which we started in 1978. We finished the house in 1980, and then did all that work. We had our beloved daughter Kelsey also in 1980, so there was a lot going on. And we ended up really loving this place so much. If you could see it, the rhododendrons are in bloom. Some of them are as much as almost 40 years old. I guess they're about 38 years old.
So we had this balsa wood scale model of the house. And so I took it down to the planning department and said, we need to get a building permit. And I put this balsa wood model on the stand, and the clerk just looked at it and shook his head. He said, no, you've got to have plans drawn. And I said, well, I looked at the ordinance, and it just said you had to present to the planning department a reasonable facsimile of what the house would look like. And I said, this is exactly what the house would look like, much better than plans. And we kind of had a little back and forth, and then I said, maybe I ought to talk to the supervisor here. He said, I think you better. And so the supervisor came out, and this guy had explained what this troublemaker was in the office, and what you said he'd throw him out and call the police. And the supervisor looked at the model and he says, just give him the permit and get him out of here.
So this was a great place to have children and have them grow up and be able to roam in the woods and so forth. And they both went to the local school until they were in middle school. And then we started taking them into town since we both worked in town. Rand was at Fairhaven as a teacher, and I was at the counseling center.
We had young children, and we built a house that we live in, but the first thing we built was the workshop. And that the workshop became my haven for carving birds. And one of the things that I guess I love birds and I love wood, and it seems to me the perfect way of displaying wood is to carve birds, because the curvilinear shape of the birds accentuates the grain patterns, the color variations, the spalting, and so you're able to use the nature's pattern of making birds and nature's pattern of making wood and combine them together. And that's, to me, is the real satisfaction. I sometimes think in my own mind that I really carve birds just because it's a very, very nice way to display wood. Yeah. So you can see the shop is well populated with blocks of wood. And so I just picked this one up sort of at random. But the first thing I see in it is very, very curly. And the curl is made just by the grain of the wood going like in very tight waves. And so the wood is really all the same color, but it's except that what makes color is the color differentiation is the refraction of the light as the wood curls like this. So I look at this and I see this is going to will make a nice bird, but it's quite small. So I couldn't carve a goose out of this, or I couldn't carve a raven out of this. And I look at this and this looks like about the right size for a rufous-sided towhee. Maybe a dipper, but I've got a lot of length in it, and the towhee's a longer bird, so that would probably be a choice that I'd make. And also, since the towhee is a long bird, it would show up this curl in it very nicely, where a shorter bird, like a dipper, you would see less of that curl. And we have towhees coming to our bird feeder every day, and so I feel it's a good homage to a towhee. One of the interesting things about carving is that people think you're just using one hand, really, but you're pushing with your right hand and you're resisting with your left hand. So you're creating a tension between your hands, and that's the way you can maintain control over the chisel or the gouge, where if you were just pushing with one hand, it would just tend to go off into space and you'd have no control over it. So you're really putting matching pressures from your right and your left hand. This is a piece of maple. It's from a maple burl, and it's also got spalting in it. You'll see the black line. That's where the wood was in the early stages of decay. But if you dry the wood before it goes too far, it makes these beautiful patterns in it. It also causes the discoloration in the wood. And this is a maple burl, so in addition to that, you get the highlighting when it gets oiled from the irregular grain in the wood. And hopefully this will turn out to be a stellar jay. That's the plan for it. But you never quite know whether it's going to follow the plan or not. See, the grain here is going like this, and here it's going like this. So you always want to go with the grain. So if I wanted to carve on this side, I would either have to stand over here or turn the bird around, so I'd be carving in this direction. That's usually reliable, but with a burl, it's not reliable because the grain shifts back and forth in the process of creating the burl. And so you get a grain that's very complex. And it also creates these beautiful patterns, but it also means that you have to be consciously trying to figure out which way you should be going. And no matter which way you go, it was probably the wrong way. So the tools here you see in the the tool, I'm sort of a tool groupie. These are all tools made by a man named Dick Anderson, who's deceased now. And every one of these tools was hand forged and tempered by eye. The relationship with Dick Anderson was really, when he was alive, I would always talk to him, I said, we carved this bird rather than that I carved the bird, because I could not have done it without the tools that he had fashioned. If you look at my carving stand, every one of these tools is a Dick Anderson tool. Even the handles are a work of art. I think the handle to this tool is black walnut. But look here, you see probably 5 or 6 different species of wood that the handles are made out of. And it's interesting as I use these tools over and over and over again. They almost have a personality in my mind of what they will do and what they will refuse to do. And I can identify them not only by the blade, the shape of the blade, but by the handles, and both by sight and by the feel of the handles. I think the tools are probably my most prized possession in the world. And one of the things that I think about as I get even older is what's going to happen to these tools. Where can the tools go that a new generation of carvers and woodworkers can have access to these tools and learn how to take care of them. This is a swan, pretty much a pretty big carving. It's carved out of local spalted maple. Spalting is, you see the black lines in the piece, and that's the spalting where the fungus has begun to invade the wood and try to reclaim the wood into the soil. But if you catch it at the right time, you catch it before it's gone very far, the wood still has structural integrity, and you can use it in a way that I think really enhances the wood. I like the more complex, the more things going on in the wood, the more interesting I think the wood is. For instance, you see on the wing there, some people will look at that and say, oh, there's a flaw in the wood. I see it as a perfection in the wood. It's a mark that the wood is natural, that it takes its own form, it takes its own shape. And when you cut into a piece of wood, you never know what you're going to find inside. To me, one of the most exciting things that I do in carving a bird is when I open a piece of wood for the first time. And when I opened this piece of wood, I knew that there was some spalting, but I didn't know where it would appear. And in trying to shape the bird and place it on a block of wood that I was going to carve, I try to maximize the different configurations of the grain, the different colors in the wood, and for instance, I wanted to get spalting into the head of the bird, because the head of a bird is the place that you tend to focus when you first see a bird, and then the complexity here, you had to have enough grain that would support the curvature of the wood. So it was a complex piece. I was excited that it worked. Right up to the end, I wasn't sure it was going to work. And in fact, my good friend Bruce Smith, who's now deceased, knew that I was getting ready to take this piece to a gallery to sell, and he said, no, you can't let that bird leave Bellingham. And so he bought it right off the bat, and now it's lives in the house with his dear former wife, his widow, Janice Keller, and she graciously let it come and participate in this bird show. This is a raven in the unlikely pose of a raven preening its foot. I was hiking with some friends in the floor of the Grand Canyon a number of years ago. We were on a long, like 7 or 8 day hike, And we stopped for lunch one day, and I looked up, and there were 5 or 6 ravens that were playing, just like in a Walt Disney movie. They were climbing up to the top of a rock slab and sliding down. And that was just wonderful and amazing to see. And then I looked over, and there was a raven preening its foot. And I took a picture of that raven, and this is what happened with that picture. You can see the raven standing on one foot, and then he's got the toe of his other foot in his mouth. I would have never carved a bird like this unless I'd actually seen it, because it seemed so unusual for a bird to be in this pose. But it turned out to be, to me, a very interesting project and a very challenging project, because you had to line it up. I think it's most complex from an engineering point of view of a bird that I've carved, because you had to put all the weight on one leg, but then you also had to make the other leg, make sure that with the leg bent at the right angle, the toe would actually reach the beak. Since the bird's bent over at in an extended way, that affects the whole back of the bird, not only the mouth and the head of the bird. So it was a really fun challenge, and one that I was happy with the outcome, because the bird did end up with its foot in its mouth. This is a snowy owl, and this is a great example of spalted wood. It was such a great example of spalted wood that rather than mounting the bird on a base, I incorporated the base into the bird, so that you have a continuity of the spalting that goes from the bird into the base that it's standing on. And it's a very complex piece of wood. It's actually a large burl, and you see that there's no consistent grain. The grain is all gnarly, which makes it very difficult to carve, but also it's worth it, because the end result is, even if you don't do a very good job of carving, the end result is a beautiful piece, because the wood is so beautiful. You notice that the beak is black, and that's not painted. That's actually a piece of ebony, because snowy owls have black beaks, and so it was nice to minimize the intrusion with the natural materials that go into making it. This is one of the nice things about the carving, is that you don't have to make feet, because the snowy owl settles down and its feathers completely cover their legs, which is very important if you live most of your life in the Arctic, to have your legs covered. And the snowy owls do come down from the Arctic to Whatcom County. Every 2 or 3 years there'll be one here and one there, and then rarely there'll be explosions. I've seen 40 snowy owls on the roof of a greenhouse in lower British Columbia. Nobody knows why. Everybody tries to explain why all of a sudden there are hundreds and hundreds of snowy owls in southern British Columbia and in Whatcom County. And there are all kinds of theories, but none of them have been very, very convincing. But when that happens, bird watchers go nuts, and bird carvers of snowy owls love every minute of it. There's the two most exciting parts of carving a bird, and in between there's a lot of agony, but the two most exciting parts is when you first open the piece of wood and begin to see what's on the inside, and it's sometimes I'll have a block of wood that I'm going to carve a bird out of, and I'll spend a whole day just staring at the block of wood, deciding exactly how to place the bird in the block. There are limitations because the bird has to fit in the block of wood, but how you place it, which side you accentuate, and there's a lot of guesswork, because when you start peeling away the wood to get to the shape of the bird, what you thought was going to be there sometimes isn't there, and what you hoped wasn't there is there. But it's that process of discovery by looking at something. The way I think of it secretly, I don't know, it sounds too grandiose, but I'm seeing something that no one has ever laid eyes on, is what the inside of that wood looks like.
So here, this is a pair of tufted puffins. I think they're about maybe the only birds in the show that are not carved from a local wood. They were actually carved from a fence post, a redwood fence post. And it was that a friend gave me who had moved up here from California and brought the fence post with him. And it's interesting because you can see the curl in the wood. The curl is created when the wood goes like this, and then so there's really no color differentiation. It's just the refraction of the light changes as the wood changes its direction that it meets the light. And the idea here was to have one puffin that had ample fish, and the other puffin slightly resentful of that and was looking for someone to share their fish with him. I used to do a lot of sea kayaking, and one of the most exciting things you can do when you're sea kayaking is to find a colony of puffins. And so it's a favorite bird to carve, and they present all kind of fun things. First of all, they have webbed feet, and so you have to add not only legs and toes, but webbing between their feet. People often ask me how feet are made. That's funny. People are just focus on that. In fact, one person I consider it a great compliment, accused me of cutting feet off of live birds and putting them onto the wooden birds, which I do not do. So the legs are made out of wood, and the toes are made out of just coils of solder. I don't use it as solder, I just use it as toes, but you have a nice round, and you can get it in different sizes. And then the webbing between the toes is made of sheets of lead that people used, particularly like if you were going to roof a cathedral, and you needed to cover up the cracks and things. They had this sheet of lead because you can push it into all different kinds of shape to make the flashing, to keep the roof from leaking. And then the toes are made out of nails that I bend the nails, and I drill a hole into the solder coil and insert the nails. So these woods are made, this is made out of wood, lead sheeting, solder, and nails.
Oh yeah, me too. I got my hair engaged. Make that work.
And so you are able to use the nature's pattern of making birds and nature's pattern of making wood. So I was on a kayak trip, and I found this piece of wood on the beach, and this is what it looked like. And I thought it was really interesting. It was the color and the shape. And so I brought it home, and I sat it down outside of the workshop in sort of a passageway between the workshop and the house. And it sat there for about 20 years. And the way it was then, it was too big. I couldn't figure out really what to do with it. And then one day I walked by and I said, it needs 2 Stellar Jays sitting on it. And so that was the origin of this plan to put the 2 Stellar Jays mounted on the 2 burls on the piece of driftwood. They'll be standing about like this. And you can get a little bit better idea what they look like if you look at the patterns. And so that's what they won't be blue like that, but because they're both of them made out of maple burls and have spalting in them, they will have really interesting color variation and very complex highlighting from the in undulation of the grain. The wood literally springs to life, and so that's sort of it's the beginning and the end. It's most exciting, but in between, to me, it's like meditating. My wife Dana meditates, and I've sold her on the idea. Well, I'm just going to go to the workshop and meditate for a while, because when I'm carving a bird, I forget about whether I've eaten or not. I forget about what's going on, but mostly I forget about washing dishes.